Well, good morning. I know it's only been a couple of days since I did my last coffee time with Pastor Joseph, but I was thinking last night and this morning as I was reading my Bible and just praying about the day and the time that we're living in. And I thought about something, and I'm drinking my coffee this morning out of my Canada mug. And this was a mug. I was doing the Instagram coffee stories at the time, and I still do them occasionally, not nearly as much as I did there for a while. I was trying to tell all the stories of all my mugs that I have hanging up on my mug wall upstairs, and I had um, a bunch of different ones. And then we had some candle in the window guests who came by, and they had been listening to my coffee mug stories on Instagram, and so they left me a gift of a mug from Canada. It was a pastor and his wife and their daughter from Canada, and they left me a Canada mug, and I always remember that. And so every time I think of this Canadian mug, I think of the fact that the church is alive and well in Canada as well, and that people are working there. So I I'm drinking my Canada mug because of another story that I want to tell here in a minute that I'm getting to. um, the very first time that I drank coffee, that was what my question. I started thinking about the first time I drank coffee. And for some of you, you might be able to remember exactly where you were and how it was when you drank coffee. And for others, I asked my boys, I said, when did you drink coffee the first time? And Peter looked at me kind of blankly, and Eric was like, huh? Hudson can't remember. William, I remember the first time William drank coffee because he saw that I was drinking something and he grabbed for it and he just chugged it. And then about 5 minutes later, he spit up the worst spit up he'd ever spit up in his life. So you have to be a little bit careful when you give kids coffee. And that was what my mom had heard when I was a baby and when I was a little boy. My mom had heard people say, you have to be careful because, and it's some truth in it. There's something in caffeine, something in coffee that somehow interacts potentially with hydration and with calcium and your calcium intake. And so I don't know what it is. I haven't researched it. I just know that it's not as bad as they had at first thought it could be, potentially. And you'll notice this a lot, actually. People will hear, oh, so this and that together could be really bad. And so we have to be very, very careful. And it's potentially horrible. It's like when COVID-19 first came out, and we were told that potentially it'll have a 5% death rate. And if it had a 5% death rate, then we should have been doing a ton of things already. But as it was, it didn't turn out to be a 5% death rate. It turned to be a 0.03% death rate worldwide, I believe, for the people who get it. So, but I didn't come here to talk about that. It just, it's floating around. Everyone's talking about it. And chances are, sooner or later, we'll all be exposed to it. We'll recover from it, and eventually, we should eventually start seeing it just as any other flu, where it has its danger, and we need to be careful. But our main responsibility is to keep our own bodies strong. But here I go again. I didn't come here to talk about that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a politician, so I shouldn't be talking about COVID-19. I'm a pastor, so I have other things I could talk about, but I wanted to talk about coffee. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the very first time I had coffee. And I think it was 1989. We had been living in Nunley, Tennessee. My parents had built a log cabin back in the woods off of Pinewood Road. And I remember when we were living there that we had church at our house and my parents were hosting it. And I remember that. I remember my parents hosting church, and I remember that they made a lot of coffee at the time. The thing that I don't remember is, was that truly the very first time that I had coffee? I am not actually sure. And so, well, actually, I know this. I didn't have coffee. I have to keep my stories straight. I do not think I had coffee at that point. What I did have, I think that first time that I remember thinking about coffee and seeing about coffee was that 1988, 1987 time period, and we were hosting church, and my parents were making a lot of coffee, and my dad was making coffee, and my mom was talking about how she liked to smell coffee. Hi, Peter.
Hey.
Let's see. Let me see if I can actually turn you on where people could potentially hear you. There we, whoop, there we go. I think they could hear you now. Maybe not. No. Oh no, it's not plugged in. Okay. It's right here. So, do you remember the very first time you had coffee?
No. But I remember y'all telling me about the first time I had apple cider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't spit up when he had apple cider, but he did have some bodily functions that went wrong. He was a baby.
Yeah.
Do you like coffee?
Yeah, I like it.
And when you drink coffee, is it more milk or more coffee?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, I know because I make it. When you were a baby, it was like lots and lots of milk with a touch of coffee in it. So, but yeah, so the idea is that I was just going to tell them the very first time I remember having coffee. So we'll see you. Thanks, Peter, for coming by. So 1989, we had moved from our log cabin. We were living out in another place on Pinewood Road, and my family was getting ready to move out of state. I didn't realize it at the time. I was 9 years old. I was just living life, going along. We were an Amish family, and we are getting ready to move to a different community because that was one of the challenges that we faced. Is today I'm a pastor, and if someone's is in church with us, and for various reasons it is determined that they would function better in the body and their gifts could be used better in a different church, they can just move which church they go to. We can bless them, send them off, they can head over to the other church, and that's how it can work. However, when the Amish church, if you lived, depending where you lived, that determined where you went to church. And so if you wanted to go to a different church, you either had to leave the Amish or you had to physically move to the next district, wherever it was. And so for us, we tried moving up to a new district in Missouri that never got its footing, and then we ended up going out to Montana. So in 1989, we were living in this house on Pinewood Road near Lyles, Tennessee, and it was a time of mail order coffee. So my dad had this package of samples from someplace. It was a huge, and it had all these little one-time coffee bags on it. It was like instant coffee, I guess. And so he had gotten these samples, and somehow or another he got 2 or 3 of these sample packages. And so he was going through all the samples first. And I just remember he would make a cup of coffee. Mom would come and smell it and say, I like how it smells. And then Dad would drink his coffee. And my little sister Rachel, she was so determined that she would love this coffee. And I thought, I am the oldest son. I probably would like coffee too. And so I think it was a Sunday afternoon, we were sitting around the house and Dad was going to make coffee, and we asked. He said, "Yeah, you can," and he let us have, and it might have been the decaf. I don't know. He let us have 2 packs of coffee, and Rachel made one, and I made one. That's how I remember it, and I just remember how bravely Rachel tried to drink it. But I think in 1989 she would have been 6 years old. Anyway, she didn't like it, and I was older. I was 9 years old, and I didn't like it, and so, but I remember liking watching my dad drink the coffee and liking thinking about it. Now, of course, the way we just made it straight. We just dropped it in and just had a straight cup of coffee. We didn't get to have any sweeteners or creamers or anything with it. So, if you do that for a kid, if they have sweeteners and creamers, then there's a better chance that they'll like the coffee. So, that was probably my first time drinking coffee. But the first time I drank coffee as a man was when I was a little bit older, and I was actually in Montana at the time, and I was trying to find a coffee mug earlier from Montana because I have coffee mugs from Peru and all over the world, Switzerland, a lot of other places. I don't have a coffee mug from Montana. And so if you'll take a lesson from me, just from my earlier story, I had said I was doing coffee mug stories online, and people were coming through with Candle and Window Network. They came from Canada. They brought me this mug. Well, there's 2 things to be learned here. One is that in Denver, Colorado right now, where I live, we have 2 spare bedrooms, and if you're traveling, you can call, text, connect with us, message us, and we have 2 bedrooms. You can stay a night with us. And if you do that, you don't have to bring me a mug. But if you were to be coming from a state where I don't have a mug from and you brought a mug, then later I could tell the world that, hey, so and so came to my house and brought me a mug. So that's just some information for you. I'm interested in the mug and the fellowship, and you might be needing a bed in Denver, Colorado area. So there's your little bit of free information for today. I'm trying to tell a story about the first time I drank coffee, and I've told you parts of it. So 1989, some instant coffee. But the first time I drank coffee and felt like a man was probably 1995. My mom had said she didn't really want us to be drinking coffee and doing those kind of things until we were older. But in the West Kootenai there, in Montana, people were drinking mocha, and they'd get a mocha mix. Now mocha has coffee in it as well as some chocolate and other things. It's like a hybrid drink. And so I know that we had mocha at our house for a while, and we would have coffee mocha. And so I had those, but that still was kind of like a special drink. It didn't seem like coffee to me. But in the fall of 1995, Kootenai Christian Fellowship was getting ready to fill the basement with wood, and we needed to put wood into our basement for the church, so that on those cold winter mornings, someone would go down there 3 in the morning, sometimes earlier, and we would start a fire in the basement in the furnace, and it would hopefully warm up the place, by the time everyone was there for church. And so we were headed out and going to go make firewood. And I remember all of the men coming in and meeting at Enos Miller's shop there in Eureka. And then we were going out into the woods and getting that, and we're coming back in. And basically, I don't remember. It felt to me like we showed up at Enos Miller's, went out and got the wood and came back. But we may have just all gone with the wood. And then, however it was, we ended up at Enos Miller's shop. And people, the men that I was working with, Dad and I were there, the men were drinking coffee. And my dad, knowing full well that my mom had requested us not to really drink coffee until we're 18 and can make our own life decisions, my dad was like, Joseph, today you can have coffee. And so I remember thinking, well, okay then. And so I went over there, I poured some coffee. I went back and I found a little bit of sugar, and I put some sugar in my coffee. And then there was this creamer stuff there, so I put a little bit of that in there. And then I had a donut with it. So it was a very, very sweet thing. However, I just remember that I really felt like a man for the first time. I was there and I was drinking coffee and I felt like a man. So I have to plug my computer in. I somehow managed to be running its battery down again. Here we go. And so first time I drank coffee, didn't really like it. Second time, I remember drinking coffee. I might have had something in between there, but the second time that I remember drinking coffee, I felt like a man for drinking it, even though, as I just told you, there were donuts and there was other stuff involved. But I was drinking coffee. And the reason I wanted to just chat and share that story was that my parents were living in a time and a culture where almost everyone around us was doing something a little bit different than we were doing. When we were Amish, there were other Amish families that were doing the same things. After we left the Amish, we were part of a church. We were believers, but we were surrounded with others who would have had different lifestyles, that they weren't, and specifically there were people that weren't trying to separate themselves from the world. And so we were still trying to separate ourselves from the world. Now, this is an interesting discussion. How do you separate yourself from the world? And you can separate yourself in many ways. For instance, I can say that the very first time, I can start talking about coffee and say, well, the way I take my coffee is, and I explain how I do my coffee. And then you can say, oh, I drink my coffee black all the way. And then someone else says, oh, you know what? I don't just drink coffee. I order the beans and I grind my own beans. And then the next guy says, oh, yeah? Well, I get my beans green and I roast them and then I grind them. And that's how I drink coffee. And then there's the guy that says, oh, yeah, I grow my own beans and then I roast them and then I grind them and then I make coffee. And that's actually what some of my friends in Peru can do. They have a coffee farm and they grow the beans and then they can roast them and make the coffee right on the spot. It's awesome coffee. So there's many ways that we can separate ourselves from other people, and we can choose what those ways are. The way I grew up, we had some very religious things that were seen outwardly, as in clothing. And we had the issue with that was that it was easier to look on the outward and say, well, outside I'm different here and here and here and here. But the inside could often be very much the same. I remember as a little boy promising my mom that I would never drive a truck and then feeling very sad about it because I really hoped that one day I could drive a Peterbilt. I really wanted to be drive an 18-wheeler someday. And so even while I was promising my mom as a little boy, my little heart was going, oh no, I want to drive it. So outward conformity is one way to be different from the world. But I don't think that's quite what we're after. And so my parents, and this is, I'm still just trying to tell you the story about the first time I drank coffee and the thoughts I had about it and um, what I thought when I was thinking about the first time I drank coffee. Because of the fact that my mom had said, I don't want you to drink coffee until you're 18. And that time when I was 16, my dad said, okay, Joseph, you can drink coffee. And it made me feel like a man when I drank that coffee. So the decision making is what we're talking about here. The managing of my time and even my money. My parents were trying to be very responsible in the way they raised us. They didn't want us to be careless with money. They didn't want us to buy junk with money. And so, for the most part, they had asked that we would put all of our money basically in the family bank. And if we needed anything, then that's right, Gary. Organic in the Amazon jungle. That's the way to make coffee right there. And so, by the way, I can't actually see who's listening until you comment something. That's the only way I can see who's listening with the program that I'm using. So, thanks for listening. But the concern my parents had was, how do we get our children to have our values and to not have the world's values? And so there were a lot of rules that they had put into our life. So for instance, I didn't have my own money, my own bank account until I was about 21. I think I was 21. And we talked about it different times along the way. In fact, for me, my parents were like, well, why don't you, Joseph, why don't you just continue putting all of your earnings into the family fund? And I did. I would cash my check into the family bank accounts. And that's what I did until I was 21. And when I was 21, my parents gave me a car, and I'd been living at home this whole time. So I was living at my house, and my money was in one place. Now, since then, my parents and I have talked about this a lot of times. In fact, my dad has apologized. He says, I don't think we did the right thing with that. I don't think that was what we wanted. And I agree with him. I don't think it's what we want. And here's the challenge. Christian parents, in an effort to train up their children, can go from training to controlling. And it can be where they're controlling everything about it, what time they drink coffee. So, for instance, in my life, now that I'm a parent, I've been letting my children have coffee from the time they're little. I mean, at first it's heavy whipping cream or whatever and a little bit of coffee, but they get coffee. Their children, they might react to me and go the other way. I mean, my mom said, no coffee till you're 18. I'm like, hey, you're a baby. You're able to drink stuff. Here, have some coffee. And so you'll see pictures and videos of me holding just about every one of my babies. And on the last film shoot, I was trying to drink some coffee. And here comes little William. I'm holding him, actually. And he's like, Dad, I want that coffee. He grabs it, and he's chugging down coffee. And so it's interesting how I'm doing it differently than my parents did it, but I've talked about it with my parents. It's been a very healthy discussion. And of course, we don't sit around going, okay, so let's open the perimeters. Let's allow more freedom. That's not how we're talking about it. We're saying, in general, big picture here, how do we raise our children? And what we're really wanting, what my mom wanted and what she did well, was she wanted her children to have hearts for God. And that's what she was working on. Now, along the way, she did some external things that were very helpful, and she did some external things that were not helpful. And so there's been times when my parents have apologized for certain things that they did that they think was not helpful for us. And that's important. And so the same way, I'm looking at my children going, I'm probably going to have to apologize for something. Probably not for giving them coffee when they're tiny, but there's going to be something in their growing up years that I'm going to have to apologize for, more than likely. Most parents need to apologize to their children at least once. And if you only have to do it once, then you're a real saint. But most of us will need to apologize to our children as they grow up. And we need to discuss, why did we make certain decisions? Because what can happen is Christian parents, this is the dilemma that Christian parents have. And it's the dilemma of training our children. We want them to think. We want them to lead. We want them to be fearless explorers. We want them to go out into the world and stand up against a wicked culture all around them. We want them to love God with all their hearts. But wait. We don't want you to think up new things and lead in new ways and be a fearless explorer in our house. And so you'll hear Christian parents say things like, not in my house. This is my jurisdiction. You don't get to say what to do. And so the kid is left with a bit of a, okay then, you want me to stand up against the world. You want me to think better ways of doing things. You want me to be able to choose my path without going with the flow. However, you want me to go with the flow of what's happening in my house. And it can be a real dichotomy. And in some homes, it's really bad. It gets to the point where Christian children learn to talk one way and live another way. And we commonly call that hypocrites. And the parents are actually training them to do that. It's a problem. So what you're trying to do, and this is the challenge that I thought about when I started thinking about coffee, was you're trying to train your child to think for themselves, to make right decisions, but in your house you want them to obey you and follow you and do all of that stuff. And so it's a really challenging bit. And as a parent, with my oldest, Peter turned 8 years old yesterday, and so that is a real challenge. How do we take care of that? And this is where the apologies come in, because you're probably going to do it wrong. I'm probably going to do it wrong at some point. We're going to have to apologize and ask your children for forgiveness. What we're really after is we want our children to understand that there's a verse. My mom used to quote this verse because we would come to her and we'd be like, Mom, did you know? And we'd tattle on one of our siblings. They're doing this or that. And my mom would say, not exactly in these words, but she'd kind of quote this one. It said, "You are." This is Romans 14:4. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. And my mom's whole thing was like, look, I'm dealing with that child. I'm dealing with you. You make sure you're obeying and you're in the right standing here at the house, and that's good. Don't overstress it about the next guy. But we would get so stressed out about each other and be trying to control the other person. As a parent, one of the things I'm seeing is that I can do the same thing still. I can get so stressed out about my kid and how he's acting and what he's doing and what he's saying. And I can be all like, this child is going to obey and all of these things. But I want to de-escalate that in myself. Oh, looks like I have a hard hat floating around in my room. Hey, Hudson. I want to de-escalate that and say, it's not that I want you to conform just because you're living in my house. I want you to understand that your master is God and that before him you want to stand or fall. And I'm praying that God, the master of my children, would enable each one of them to be able to stand. So even with my children, I want to make sure that I don't think that I can control their lives better than they can. Because the concept that I know better than you about your life is socialism. It means that a few people somewhere can put their heads together and control the masses and do it better than the masses can for themselves. And you don't want to raise a bunch of socialists in your house. Oh, got one more kid here. They just keep dropping in. Hi, William. So I want my children to know that they are responsible before God for what they're doing. I don't want them to only try to do the right thing when I'm around. I don't want them to jump when I show up and quickly try to do the right thing. I want them to be standing before God by themselves in my own house. I don't want to say things like, not in my house, because that is a bit of a mistake. So, I don't know, it says it disconnected. You might be having a buffering issue out there. OBS is having a bit of a problem. So that's my thought for today. I just wanted to encourage y'all to say, here's my story. The very first time I had coffee, and here's an example. William wants coffee. You want a sip? It's pretty strong. What do you think? Woo! Is that yummy or yucky? He doesn't quite know. So, in the world today, there are a lot of people who think that they know better how to live your life than you do. In the world today, there are people in government, there are people in families, there are people in church who believe they understand better how to run your life than you do. And you have to really watch yourself against those people because they don't care who your master is. They don't care whether you're going to stand or fall. They just want you to conform and obey. And one of the things I'm grateful for is that my parents were coming from a place where, hey, bud, why don't you hop over here? There we go. My parents were coming from a place where it was okay to control. My parents were coming from a place where it was expected that they not only controlled themselves, their children, but that my dad was supposed to control the people in the church. And what I learned from my parents, partly through their apologies, partly by seeing the result in me of what happened when they were trying to control my ways of thinking, and partly through the way they did it right, was that you can't go up there, William. Was that it is, poor William, it is really important for us to realize that it's not about me controlling you. And if anybody is controlling me or I'm trying to control someone else, that is not what God intended. With children, I am to guide them. I do protect them from electrical things and stuff when William tries to climb up on top of the desk. I do that. But there is a real need that I understand that I'm training them to walk with God. I'm not controlling them. I will not always be there. There are days even now when my 8-year-old can look at his circumstances and decisions, and he knows more about what's going on and what he needs to tell his brothers than I do. But I need to make sure that I'm training him to understand how to make those decisions. And then I need to trust that his decisions will be okay. So, now that I have a crying 18-month-old on the floor over here, he's kind of cute, but he just needs to go take a nap. So I don't know if you can make the connection that I just did between how you give your children coffee or not and how the country is run. There are people that are trying to control you, and I'm telling you, you need to go make your coffee and realize that before God and you are responsible to God. In a few jurisdictions, you are responsible to pay respect. You know how Jesus said, give to God what is God's and to Caesar what is Caesar's. We need to respect authority in those ways. But on the great judgment day, when you stand before God, you will answer for you. You will not answer for the masses. There's nobody that can answer for you. You will answer for you. There's no one else that you can answer for. You will answer for you and only you. And that's what we need to live and understand and respect each other. When I am telling you about my thoughts on COVID-19 or my thoughts on government or my thoughts on church, my thoughts on theology, my thoughts on coffee and what the best way is to have it, I'm telling you, I have to remember that you're going to have to answer to God directly, and I'm going to have to answer God directly, and we need to respect each other for that. So let's help each other remember what God is saying, but let's not try to make decisions for each other. So those are my coffee thoughts for today, and I am grateful for coffee, and I'm grateful that I get to drink it. So blessings until next time.